Good day, everyone. I'm Frederick from Dune. We're a crypto data company that allows anyone to easily write some SQL on our website, analyze blockchain data, and visualize the results. And so I'm going to start this off by telling you a little bit about what is happening on Solana when it comes to activity. So from a high level, we can see that Solana has started sort of half year ago. There was about 2.3 million active users a month. Then that has been trending downwards, but not as much downwards as sort of the prices. And now actually in October, the first month in the last half year, where daily active users is up again. So that is good news. If we look more deeply at specific sectors, we could look at DEXs, for instance, and see that this has also been trending downwards, but not a lot. Like it's not like dropping like a stone. We can see that there's Steppen and Serum have by far their largest market share of users. And it's now at around 25,000 daily active users. And this is not that far from DEXs on Ethereum, which is around 35,000. So it's the same order of magnitude of users. But as you probably know, something that's even bigger than DEXs on Solana is NFTs. So let's have a look at some NFT stats. So number of projects on Ethereum is only around 60,000. It's obviously quite expensive to create them. Versus on Solana, there is 3.6 million NFT projects. And we can see that the weekly number of projects created for Ethereum is around 1,000 a week, versus Solana, where it's been way, way more. It's now down more, but it's still way, way higher than Ethereum. I think this is around 30,000 a week of projects created. And if we look at the unique buyers, Solana is now at around 40% market share in terms of unique NFT buyers relative to Ethereum. But if you look at the volume, the actual sort of gross market value of these trades, it's only around 10%. And so hopefully, if you're a curious mind, you're now wondering, how do I make these charts? Maybe I can look deeper. What can I do? And so Solana launched on Dune earlier this year, and we only had a few data tables available. So these were the tables that you could use on Dune for Solana. So this is pretty low-level stuff. You have the blocks, the rewards, the transactions, and these schemas give you certain tables that are things like block time and fee. And then there's instructions where it's most of the interesting stuff around the program happens. And if we look deeper at a table like this, this data is pretty low level. Like you get an array of instructs, and in the sort of deep in the weeds here, you find out who's actually using what product and what they're doing, which is a bit hard to work with. And Dune pioneered user-friendly data tables for Ethereum. We created the easiest to work with data sets for the Ethereum space starting 4 years ago. And that has been sort of the key thing we've enabled for that space. And the thesis behind that is that basically raw blockchain data is made for machines. Blockchain is just a computer, and anyone can't look at this and make any sense of it because computers, talk in a different language than humans. And so a simple thesis behind Dune has been that humans are not computers, and they rather want to look at human-readable tables. So today I have an amazing new announcement for the Solana space. So Solana is now becoming the first non-EVM chain on Dune with decoded data. Woo! That means you will all have a set of super nice human-readable tables to work from. So let's have a quick look at what this looks like. So basically what you get here is a schema for each project instead of only the low-level blockchain stuff. So all the different projects you can submit IDLs and create these schemas, and then you get a set of tables for each function. And so what that's look like is you get a nice column for each data field. So then you can way more easily see who are the traders, what is the activity, what are the amounts, and whatnot. So this is way, way easier to work with. And so let's take an example. If we want to look at Jupiter, the aggregator, and count daily transactions the last 6 months, previously, or daily trades, previously, you would have to work with some messy arrays to figure out the actual stuff you want to do. And there would be so much data, because you have to scan so many tables to figure this out, that it would time out. So this one specifically, last 6 months, is 60 million data points. And now, with these new tables, this same query runs in 6 seconds. And it is way, way easier to work with. So you have both better performance and better UX with working with the data. So that means that you can super easily go ahead and create all kinds of dashboards and visualizations in seconds with easy-to-use data. So we're rolling this out these days. So if you want to check this out, you should join our Solana channel in our Discord. We also have an API product that's coming very soon. And all of this you can do for free, open access on Dune.com. So thank you very much.
I think so. All right, guys. Well, first of all, Frederick, Dune, guys, we have big brains on this stage. Well, I think we'll just start with quick introductions. I'll kick it off. My name is James Troutman. I'm a research analyst with Masari, and in particular, I work with our protocol reporting group and cover base layer protocols, including Solana. And essentially what we do is produce financial statements, if you want to call them that, right? So quarterly reports for base layers. And as part of doing that, we do a lot of quantitative work and evaluate on-chain data, off-chain data, basically as much information as we can. We use Dune, we use lots of different explorers, block explorers. We have data scientists that are pulling data in order to drive insights, to understand what's going on, right, and following the progress of Solana specifically in this case. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here, but excited to discuss, measuring what matters with these guys. I think they know a little bit about that. So I guess quick introduction, starting with yourself.
So hi guys, I'm Nicholas. I'm one of the co-founders of Solana FM. So what Solana FM is that we're basically a data infrastructure provider for the entire Solana layer. So we not just build explorers in general, we actually offer APIs that are easy for you to access. Probably what was mentioned earlier, right? Like human readable data APIs. So that's what we focus on. And we're also striving towards building maybe SDKs and tooling that helps Solana builders build much quicker and easier.
I mean, you have introduced yourself already, but I guess maybe you can just tell us really quickly why Dune, right? I mean, we know who you are, right? You started, created Dune, but why? Give us a sense of where you started.
Yeah, I think for us, it's always been very interesting that blockchains are these open data sets that just keeps producing more data. But that's just like a theoretical thing. It's in practice been, and to some extent still is, like very hard to work with these things and actually make it a practical reality to leverage this data in various ways. And so that's basically what we're trying to solve.
Makes sense.
I'm Dave with the Etherfuse. Our mission is essentially to promote the decentralization of infrastructure that powers the blockchain. We're really focused on helping more emerging markets capture the value they create with crypto. And so a big kind of value statement for us is to know where infrastructure is not, to set it up there and write tools and legal frameworks so that they can do it profitably. And we can kind of promote the strength and security of the blockchain through that.
Great. I could barely hear you, but I think I got it.
I know. I'm getting the
get some
gist of
more.
everything. I think they can hear us, but we are having a harder time hearing each other.
Just scream at me.
Okay,
I'll be
I'll
all
do
right.
my best.
Yeah. All right. So this session and topic is measuring what matters, and that's a very loaded topic. It could be anything and everything. It may exist already. It may not exist. There may be things that I'm sure all of you guys are working on, right, towards measuring something. But I guess let's just start right with the session, right with the topic. What matters, right? Frederick, you kind of pulled up some high-level data around Solana. We know that the NFT activity on Solana is exploding. It's continuing to explode. We saw over the third quarter, right, 10% of sales volume, but there was a 5% change over the quarter, right? So it was a massive influx during, as well, a pretty slow market. So, but that's just one thing to measure, right? And does it really matter? I think it sure matters, but I guess starting with you, what do you think really matters? Is there something that already exists that we should truly be tracking, or is there something else that doesn't exist that you're working on that we should be also, like, what do you think really matters in terms of measuring activity and
So I think speaking specifically for Solana, right, since we specifically just built data pipelines just for Solana, I can only speak for that. Generally what we've been doing so far is that we've been going deep down into actual things like per se blocks. Like let's say maybe there's n number of actually transactions that can squeeze inside the block, right? So what transactions comprise in that block? That's a big question we can find out, right? Like, is it Jupiter swaps happening in majority of this block, or is it something like that? We could find out how efficient blocks are packed. So just speaking on the technical aspect, we can find out huge major activity patterns happening inside Solana. So for example, mints or NFT activities actually happen much more proactively inside GMT 0 between maybe per se 12 all the way to 6 p.m. So I actually reside in Singapore. So in the middle of the night, right, you won't actually get very little activity. You actually get a lot of activity inside Solana. But during the day in Singapore, right, we actually have little to no activity compared to what's at night, right? So that's, for example, something we find out. But maybe to answer your question in more explicitness, I would say we are trying to find more like granular details here and there, so that guys like Frederick per se, Dune can actually build on top of that, and per se like wizards, right? Dune wizards could be like, oh, actually Solana FM has a couple of much more granular detailed point of metrics. Maybe Dune could have that, because for us, we are showing you what matters right now, but Dune shows you what matters in the entire long-term and historical sense, right? So yeah, that's what we cover here.
Well, you certainly do a lot of it and are continuing to measure everything and anything. So I guess like you personally, like or whatever it is that you're working on, like really to you, what really matters? Like if you had, let's say, one dashboard, you had only one choice, you had to look at that one thing, what would it be?
I think crypto people sometimes like to try to reinvent everything, but I think there's a very well-written and tested playbook for how to build technology products and startups. And I think, if you build a technology product, you need to understand, like, are people using my thing? Are they coming back? How engaged are they? Just like growth in usage, growth in retention, these type of things. And I think that is still like under-leveraged in crypto as a whole. Like people, look at aggregated metrics or these type of things, but actually at the end of the day, we know sort of, the technology industry knows how to build sticky, incredibly useful products. And I think those same metrics should be leveraged way more in crypto as well. If you're building something, doesn't matter if it's on chain or in like, traditional web app, like the same thing counts. Like you need people to use it. And I think that's something maybe even the Solana ecosystem is somewhat more sort of lean towards than maybe some of these others that are very sort of leaning towards the technology side, but also in Solana actually thinking about, how do we get mass adoption, how do we reach a large audience. And so I think, yeah, that's the metrics I would track. Like do the Startup 101 metrics and do that for your product on chain. That's what I think we should see more of.
Makes sense. So again, with what I do, and I'm jokingly saying, hear me? That if you looked at one thing, there's no such thing as looking at one thing, right? So when I evaluate a base layer, it's network activity, it's network functionality, it's transactions per second, it's everything, right? And I could go really, really deep into Solana and the metrics that I track and that we look at Masari. Dave, you had sent an email a couple of days ago. One thing that is lacking, or that I wish we had more of, is actually around the decentralization of a network. We know, say, the validator count on a network, and we might be able to calculate a Nakamoto coefficient, right? Which is interesting. I think it's a good start. It's certainly not the end-all, be-all measure for decentralization or gauging the decentralization of a network. I think you had emailed a little bit about this, and I think, in my opinion, being able to get more insight into the actual decentralization of a network matters. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we say measure what matters, which is a good phrase, but sometimes we also measure to find out what matters. And in our case, decentralization is really important. You hear a lot of stuff online that says, just kind of we're centralized or we have these things. So I wanted to find out and come up with a measure of that. And Balaji has a great paper on measuring decentralization, mostly focused on proof of work. And so what we did is we actually didn't create a site, I created it personally at first, but I launched a site at measure.etherfuse.com, where we picked 5 new subsystems to measure for proof of stake networks, which is political, ownership, corporate, algorithmic, and regional. We wanted to measure decentralization in those terms. What's the Nakamoto coefficient for each of those terms? And it's really helpful because you hear things like some of the biggest things people will say about Solana is it's dependent on Amazon, AWS. And if you look at the Nakamoto corporate coefficient, if you go to that site, which I know it's a crappy site. When I found out I was speaking, we really quickly made it not a dashboard. It's open source, so anyone can help us make it better, but it will be better in 3 months. You can see Amazon has a relatively small footprint considering its size for Solana. In addition to that, you can also see Solana's doing pretty well with stake distribution compared to like other chains like Ethereum. Coinbase has a relatively small footprint. And in our case, we really want to help. We view the infrastructure as a way to help folks in a community capture the value they're creating. So when we wanted to go see where should we set up validators that they currently aren't, we wanted to actually physically see where they were. We decided to prove some of our other products not related to this in Mexico, and we really got that insight by looking at decentralization, having a number and defining.
Yeah, so again, I heard maybe
sorry,
a little bit of that. I'm working on my lip reading here.
Yes,
I got a little bit of it. But what I think I heard in there is, of course, measuring decentralization across several vectors that go beyond, again, the number of, say, validators on a network and the distribution of stake, right? That's pretty much a little bit what we have now to understand how decentralized the network is. I think what you were getting at is there are other aspects of the network that we can probably measure, such as location, right? Geographic location.
Political,
and the distribution across the globe. Do you see a world where we can actually quantify that? Say we enhance the Nakamoto coefficient with some other quantitative, and I think you might have been getting to that, to be able to measure that, right? Like, so maybe it's some sort of weighted average of this amount of distribution across the globe, this much concentration in this part of the world, this much exposure to this geopolitical risk, so on and so forth. Like, do you see that as a way to go? Like, are we moving to enhancing like the Nakamoto coefficient with some other type of coefficient to get a better idea of decentralization?
Yeah, I think one way to do it is to create like an average of Nakamoto coefficients upon an agreed set of subsystems. I know that's a word salad, but really it's hard to compare who's decentralized is really like a loaded term. It can mean a lot of things. So I think that I think the community needs to agree upon what measurements we use. and then compare those evenly, and maybe have it float up and create a way of measuring. I like a Nakamoto coefficient. I think it's helpful. It's a discrete goal, but there are also other ways to measure inequality, and maybe a discussion needs to be had. And we're open to PRs that help discuss those things too.
Great. Broderick, I'm going to come back to you. You pulled up some dashboards, some Dune dashboards, kind of looking at NFTs. GameFi. So we don't have a lot of data yet. When we look at GameFi activity, it's starting to come a little bit more, certainly a lot more than even 6 months ago. Can we expect to see a lot more GameFi applications and measures that we can look at, especially on Dune? Or do you see a different sector perhaps, or a different vector outside of GameFi? There's social applications that are also kind of rolling out. What are you thinking about in terms of what's next? What are we measuring beyond DeFi and NFTs?
Yeah, I guess at Dune we kind of have we don't try to predict as much and let whatever emerge. I mean, I probably would have been a VC if I knew what was the next big thing. But I think obviously there's throughout the last couple of years there've been a bunch of things happening, and Axie had massive numbers at some point, and so maybe I think one thing in these dynamics, whatever sector it is, one thing that's important is to bake in and understand kind of like the tokens that go into, like the token mechanisms that go into it. So I think, independent of exact sector, there are some extreme growth happening every now and then in some products or categories. And I think one thing that's very important to think about then is what's the incentive to use this thing? And I think we saw that with LuxRare versus OpenSea. Now there's a thing called Blur on Ethereum that's competing with OpenSea, but they have a token that you will get airdropped. And so I think this is maybe like a little bit of the elephant in the room when looking at some of these stats on whatever category it is, that if you make money for using the product, then those numbers are probably going down if that incentive goes away. And I think this, again, if you bring it back to traditional sort of company building or product building, that's customer acquisition costs, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. If someone gets paid money, someone else is paying that money in some shape or form. So I think that's whatever emerges, it's the dashboards will pop up, and then the question I would ask myself is what's the incentive behind this usage? Is it, to what extent is it organic versus incentivized?
Sounds good, I think. Still having a hard time hearing you guys. Making out the best that I can.
It was a great response.
It was good.
It was good.
Well, again, we talked a little bit about measuring decentralization. We just talked about what are we going to have to measure going forward, and it's really, you're just saying let's just build a foundation to be able to measure anything and everything. Not really trying to predict anything or anything like that. I don't know if any of you guys can speak to developer data, but that's another, what I think is a very important measure, is the development activity that's actually occurring within an ecosystem or on the core network itself. There's not a really good place to find that, right? So I personally think that being able to measure the actual decentralization of a network matters, probably one of the top. And what you were alluding to, I think, is probably the best way to go about it. And Solana Foundation actually did a health report in Q3 and got into some of that data. And actually, I was able to get, and there's a dashboard out there that shows where each data center is, the concentration in each data center. We know that there's a bit of concentration in Germany, right? We know that there's a bit of concentration across some data centers. Very, very important. But what we don't really have a clear picture on is the actual developer activity. Are you guys seeing anything where, something that's reliable so we can get a good sense of the actual developer adoption of a network that goes beyond like a GitHub commit and things like that, right? Because those numbers can be noisy. Any thoughts on that? I mean, if it's way out of left field, just slap me when we get backstage, but anything that you guys can recommend or that you can track when it comes to actual developer engagement?
Actually, I'm not really sure about Etherfuse, but not sure about Etherfuse, whether Etherfuse has anything specific to Solana, like related to programs, right? But I think for Dune, a couple of wizards crafted a couple of charts, right? Where they can see how many programs are deployed or got upgraded every couple of days, right? I think that's a very good, useful metric. Another metric we could see is a very old-time player. I think maybe folks from CoralCube, an NFT marketplace in Solana, right? The core origins of that team, they built this site called ChainCrunch. So ChainCrunch has a very nice site for you to just view a very clear detail of what's going on, like how many programs have been deployed so far. So as far as I know, a couple of months back, we have over 4,000 programs deployed. So that's pretty crazy of a number to see, right? I think for what I can speak for myself, for our team, we've always been focused on more granular pieces of data that's really new and really novel. You know, you don't get to see this out there. So one thing we've been trying to find out is this word in Solana called compute units, CUs. So in an actual block, right, there's only a maximum finite number of CUs you can squeeze into a specific transaction. So by doing so, we can kind of measure exactly how devs are working around and playing around with like exactly how they can pack transactions. Like, for example, right, for Jupiter swaps, I think you wouldn't have known this, but sometimes you got to pack 1 or 3 transactions, right? To make a specific trade, you got to make at least 3 transactions. So we're trying to measure stuff like that, like how much compute units are consumed for a specific swap in Solana. And I think Solana is pretty much focused on being green, right? We want to calculate like how much power is consumed for, per se, a Jupiter swap. So yeah, I think CU is quite an interesting thing. Maybe Messari as well. Messari, I don't think Messari has much of a focus on programs and dev-centric metrics because Messari has to attend to the complete mass adoption side of things, right? So I completely understand that. So my perspective is like Etherfuse focuses kind of like more validated infrastructure, network infrastructure, and decentralization kind of things. And then Dune does it in a wizardry kind of form. Like you get data analysts, data scientists to get together, build cool-ass metrics that are pretty novel and new with the entire big data warehouse you have. And then for us, we go deep into details. We try to show you details that are going to happen right now. And then for Messari, it's just, let's bring the attention to the broad scale, right? So I think, yeah, our panel here is quite crazy. We are all covering different fronts. And I guess that's how we could, probably show dev metrics like that.
And I would like to reinforce that, when we pre-ordered a Saga phone about 4 months ago, and you could mint an NFT, and I couldn't remember what wallet I used to pre-order it, and we used Solana FM to figure that out. I was like, I don't know what wallet I used, but so those details I was able to easily follow through the Explorer. So thank you for that.
Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well, we're at time. We're coming up on time here. I guess I'll just kind of close it out. Bring some relevance, back to Solana and the Solana network and measuring what matters. And, we talked about measuring decentralization. We talked about measuring activity. We talked about measuring developer engagement, all these sorts of things. What I think also really, really matters is measuring the effectiveness of a solution. And Solana, we know was experiencing some network performance issues at the end of Q4, into Q1, and even into Q2, where there was no real mechanism to order transactions, right? So there was no fee market. There was really no solution. But solutions were rolled out, and it was very, very clear, and it was important to follow that, to track that, to measure those implementations, to see. And I've been telling people like, hey, I just had an interview with Fortune Magazine. I said, look, the narrative is still over here. It needs to change. You need to look at the data. And there is a clear improvement in performance, in network performance, based on the issues that were plaguing it earlier, right? Those solutions have been working. and it's very obvious to see in the data. We're seeing TPS improving at its all-time highs. We're seeing a flow of transactions without interruption, right? That's the result of rolling out the upgrades. So in my opinion, that's another thing that I think is very important to measure is the effectiveness of a solution. So, and I think that Solana is doing a good job of actually implementing things that we can see working and we can actually measure it. So, in any case, we're a little bit behind. Any last thoughts on anything, measuring anything else?
Yeah, just measure what matters.
Measure what matters. All right. Thank you.